So materialists sometimes like to, decenter the human even further or demean the human by referring to us as monkeys that talk. And, Chomsky used to say only humans have language, but now the more we study animal communication, it seems that it's harder and harder to draw a sharp distinction between human language and the logos of nature.
Yeah.
Where humans are maybe a more intense form of it, but it's clearly pervasive. I think biosemiotics recognizes this.
Mm-hmm.
But even if that distinction is blurred, the materialist will still just say, well, language or information processing in nature, whether human or natural, is
computation.
It's computation. It's algorithmic. It is not in any way intelligent. It is, intelligible. You have to presuppose it's intelligible, otherwise there couldn't even be materialist science. But it won't attribute any purpose or agency to that which is intelligible. It won't even ground its own capacity to know, right? There's a hidden intelligence presupposed by the whole scientific perspective.
Yeah.
But it has no account of that, of its own epistemological grounds. It just presupposes that knowledge is possible.
Yeah, it presupposes a metaphysical situation and then purports to have the truth when it produces facts.
Right, but it's presupposing that there is an intelligible and that there is an intellect knowing it, and yet somehow neglects to acknowledge these presuppositions and acknowledge that intelligence, intelligibility imply purpose and agency. Mm-hmm. They're not just blind or there for no reason. There's a reason. Mm-hmm. And that's language is the expression of the reason.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we have all these, there's a whole,
The world elicits language in us.
Yes. Language is the flower of the mouth. I think Heidegger said that, but he might have been quoting...
Oh, that's pretty. I like that.
He might have been quoting Holderlin.
It's so true. That's so great.
Yeah. I think he was quoting the poet Holderlin, but don't quote me on that.
It reminds me of that, one of the, what they say, what people refer to as one of the first novels. It was written by a woman in Japan, The Tales of Genji, I think it was called. But it's so beautiful because back then, and I assume that there's similarities all across the world like this, that they speak in poetry to each other. And there's this rich cultural context for the things that are said. And it was just beautiful to me. It was like life as art, truly. Mm-hmm. And it just reminds me of that, the flower of the mouth.
So this relates to Owen Barfield's theory of language, right? And the evolution of consciousness, that it begins as poetry, and prose is sort of, and the whole idea of metaphor is really mean it. It's just as if, when you talk about, Apollo is the sun, or the sun is Apollo, or that spirit and breath and, spirit and breath and wind are all the same movement, all the same being.
That's something more than just the sum of those.
Right.
Something different. Something kind of incomprehensible.
But what does Barfield have to say to us about language and our participation in it, right?
Well, in poetic diction, I think he's making the case that it is the poetic, which it's the use of language in a way that enlarges perception, I think, and it has the potential to reshape our collective representations. Barfield uses this phrase kind of, he mentions this in Saving the Appearances. He's saying, I think it's kind of crazy, I'm paraphrasing, that people, have come to accept the notion of a collective unconscious in this post-Kantian context before they accept a collective representations, like kind of a paradigm, you could say. Instead, they take it for granted. And so poetry for Barfield facilitates in the transformation of our collective representation such that if you trace language back, you look at old words and old languages, he says they're like fossils of former forms of consciousness that have continued to transform as language and our perception is transformed.
Right. So I think it's true that there's been a pretty broad acceptance of this notion of the collective unconscious in the post-Kantian Jungian sense, and maybe not as much among educated people of an acceptance of the notion of scientific paradigms, at least people educated in STEM, I should say. Because I see a strong sense of science, both as it is defended by scientists and as it is defended by sort of the corporate media establishment, the way science figures in political discussions in the New York Times and the Washington Post and MSNBC or whatever, is a kind of science that's not aware of the role of collective representation or paradigms.
Yes.
In the formation of its own, programs of knowledge and research. And so we need more recognition of that.
Yes.
And philosophy's role, and I think conversation with the sciences, is to point out these paradigms so that they become more explicit. But
conscious.
Barfield's doing more than just critiquing the lack of awareness of this, right? He also has a sort of positive program of his own.
Yes. Yeah.
Which is what? What does he want to do? What form of... He's not just trying to give us a new collective representation.
Yeah.
Right? He also is just trying to reveal the nature of the being of which we are a part. And he thinks language is evidence of God in some ways. If we... Like the language, the logos... It's right there. It's not like it's like an open secret, as Goethe would say.
Yeah. I think what he's gesturing towards, in the Saving the Appearances, he calls it final participation, and I think that's related to notions of causality. So like final causality, and just the kind of teleological end of the human being. To raise to that level of participation. And in his book, The Secret History of Christianity, Mark Vernon, thinking with Barfield, he uses the phrase, I don't think he hasn't even said final participation yet. Instead, he uses reciprocal participation. So, it reflects a kind of conscious participation in being, in the divine life, and the intelligence, so the logos. And so this is, I think, related to, in Plato, the moment of aporia, and just intellectual intuition, Steiner in the Philosophy of Freedom, that kind of intuition. It's at once like a reconciliation with the meaning of the world, and also with a kind of the morality of existence. And so then intuition tunes into the unfolding of everything and can skillful means everything. It doesn't need a categorical imperative because it's living and breathing with the world. That's what I think Barfield's gesturing towards.
Yeah.
But in an individualized way, which is different than, so people say, and I think it's true, at least right now I think it's true. Maybe I changed my mind in the future, but...
Well, what you're making me think of is the way that the intelligible is more than just the true, it's also the good. Like there's the moral,
yeah.
the moral dimension
And the
to
beautiful.
it. And it's also the beautiful, it also has this aesthetic dimension to it, or the value dimension.
It's integrated.
And so intelligibility...
And it's life.
It's given more concreteness in a way.
You could say substance.
More substance, sure. I'll give you that.
I think that's what the ancients
philosopher.
mean. Some of them, I think that's what they mean when
Yeah.
they talk about substance, because they talk about the ether, or the fifth quintessence.
Yeah. I mean, look, in Whitehead, actual occasions or the processes that populate his cosmos, they are the substances.
Yeah.
They're the real beings that exist.
It's like the mesh.
So, call it process, call it substance. The word's not really important.
Yeah.
But the words are important because language is a craft, right? It's an art.
Well, I think the term concrete is beautiful and very intuitive. I think that was very wise choice.
So, in some way, Barfield is counseling us, I guess, we who are embedded in this evolutionary process, that we should engage language poetically and not merely descriptively or not merely representationally or literally.
Yeah.
Because that's not ultimately... While language may afford those sorts of uses, language is ultimately...
It's not exhausted
something
by
else.
them.
Yeah.
That's to me, secondary. That belongs to a certain form of consciousness that can abstractly describe that way and not be kind of caught up with it.
Yeah. So the danger of not inhabiting language poetically is what Whitehead would call misplaced concreteness.
Oh, yeah.
You mistake words for things, or for substances or processes or actual entities. You mistake the word or the sign for what is signified. And you want to do that, but at the same time, language itself is an entity.
Yeah, well, there's something true in it, right? Mm-hmm. But it's like living, not in a kind of correspondence way, match this to that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Not in that kind of materialist sense.
I would say language affords a correspondence notion of truth. It affords it. It allows
it. Does.
But it's not...
But maybe it's not permanent. You know what I mean?
Exhausted by that. And it's not... what's true in a correspondent sense today might not be true tomorrow.
Yeah, that's
may not have been true yesterday.
Transform, but there is that... I think this is important to acknowledge because then we get kind of, what people describe as postmodern or nihilism or something where there's actually really no coherence or order and we're all making it up. It's kind of like crazy making. So there has to be this recognition of really the kind of, I guess, ideal, the inside of language and if you're thinking about Whitehead,
the intelligence,
the primordial, or the realm of the forms, whatever.
Yeah, the primordial nature of God.
The hierarchies of forming beings.
Yeah.
I really like that about, I guess, among others, but Steiner, the way he talks about almost like the realm of ideas is transfigured into something that's almost more, to me, resonant with this is not the perfect word for it, but pagan or, just this hierarchy of beings that generate the world.
I think Whitehead allows for that, but they're not the eternal objects in and of themselves. They're God's feeling of, or feeling for, or feeling as incarnating into the realm of possibilities or eternal objects. And so what Steiner refers to as these beings, spiritual beings, archangels and all the rest of the angelic hierarchies, Whitehead would say that, and Jung, what he refers to as archetypes when he really gives them agency, in Whitehead's terms, would be sort of like...
societies.
Well, divine feelings. I mean, his technical term would probably be propositional feelings that are active in the interface between eternity and time.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
They're not fully eternal.
They're like in the middle.
They're not fully eternal objects.
Like the diamonds.
They're not pure eternal objects. They're not pure actualities. They're proposals or lures for feeling that act in a way that's not fully actual as. This is why angels want to, and Tolkien's elves, they want to become mortal so they can experience death.
Yeah.
Because through death that's where full actuality is achieved. It's in perishing that we become what we are.
Yeah, because you're not complete if you don't perish.
Right. So yeah, there are these hybrid entities. Steiner calls them beings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because he's recognizing their intelligence and their generative aspects or processes.
Yeah, and I think
they are. I mean, we just have this really this is what's anthropocentric. A kind of anthropocentric understanding of consciousness. I think
this being what's anthropocentric.
Well, just this strangeness of when it becomes strange for people to think about the generating powers of the world as being beings.
Oh, because we're too anthropocentric, we can't do that, you mean?
Well,
we don't usually do that.
I think it's a certain kind of anthropocentrism. There's just more of it's more common for people to just think of abstract forms rather than those having a kind of beingness to them that's relational.
So it's anthropocentric to think of them as just abstract forms, you're saying?
Yes.
Okay. Rather than giving them autonomy in their own right. Yeah.
Or just recognizing it's
that.
like we were talking about yesterday with the life of the cosmos, and the human life is kind of deriving from this larger life. Mm-hmm. But that's kind of the opposite of the way it's usually thought about.
Yeah. So there's a life of language too, and
yes,
language.
History.
This is why angels are referred to as messengers. I think there's a
that's
linguistic dimension to. I think it exemplifies the way language is an angelic hierarchy.
Yeah. Oh, that's good.
It bridges language bridges the realm of flesh, dying bodies with the heavens.
The logos, yeah.
And so it's like our rainbow bridge,
Yeah, well, and it's also what allows, what did they say? Two or more in thy name, right? Isn't that how it goes?
I am there where two or more are present in my name.
Yeah, it allows for communion. Mm-hmm. And, I think it allows for individuality and relationship to arise.
Both.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.